the first most pressing question ever in the history of ever. Published a book on April Fool's Day, man. Like, was there like a whole circus of people being like, is this a joke? Like, is this real? Like, what's going on with this? Nathan, did you publish a book really?
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, except it wasn't like April Fool's. People were like, oh, whoa, really? It's finally out, you know? Because it was actually like 5 days behind schedule. So they're like, oh, finally, cool. Now's the time. Are you sure? Nathan, are you sure now's the time? I was like, yes, today's the day. Go. Now. Run. It's a pretty fantastic feeling, you know, to do something that most people can never say they've done in their life, you know, and to have seen it even just happen in a year's time, right? Like, I decided I was going to write the book in last March, and then a year later to see it actually come to life and be actually holding it in my hand, to be like, whoa, like, I did this, right? Like, I did this. Really, it was just, right, higher power working through me. And then it became a thing, and it just has my name on it at this point, you know. And the polarizing feature of that is the fact that I went through such a process to go through this book. Like, funnily, just January, February were the darkest times I've had in a really long time. Whether it was re-experiencing or reliving certain events, right? I had a few stories in there. One of them being like the time I smoked Bufo and remembering what it was like to actually experience my own death, even though I wrote in the book that we don't actually experience death. And that's, you know, power of psychedelics. It kind of puts things into perspective a bit, to where my entire life I've lived a really, we'll say, challenging way, right? I've lived a very challenging life, a challenging path. I've chosen to embark on a journey where it's like, hey, where are all the unresolved karmic, you know, ties of my quote unquote past lives, right? And let me just sign up for all of them all at the same time. It's pretty much what it felt like. It's like the karmic resolution for a dozen lives. And it felt like all of those things happened in the book. Like the one of the challenging parts was like the aspect of grief, like actually being able to sit with the grief of losing my mom, and realizing that this nonlinear process of grief is such a challenge. But if it weren't for that grief, this book wouldn't have come to life. So being able to take my grief and birth it into a creation, quite literally a rebirth, right? That's the polarizing feature, is that there was so much pain in the creation that the remarkable qualities of the book were able to shine through despite the pain that I felt while writing it.
Nathan, was it when because you and I were in contact in December when you were going through lots of stuff at that point. Was the book already done and written at that point? And was this kind of on top of that? Or was that kind of a result of writing the book that all this was coming up? Or both?
Yeah, I think it's a both and, right? There was the 6-month build. There was the 5-day immersive experience where I wrote the book in 5 days. And then there was the 6 months of editing and formatting and designing and publishing that went with that. So, right, there's a saying that, like, when you say yes, the ceremony starts, right? So it's like, okay, I said yes to the ceremony, and then it's all of a sudden it's like, okay, cool, you're ready to go on this journey. And then higher power goes here, test, challenge, test, challenge, test, challenge, test. And it was really interesting to feel that from the very, very start. Like, there's been resistance since day one, if not day zero. But I knew it had to be done. And it was just, once it was done, then it's like, oh, now that I wrote it, I actually have to live it. And that was the more challenging aspect too. It's when there's a book in the world, like, you have nowhere to run. Like, you can't run, you can't hide anymore. At least that was my story, right? Because I was, you know, participating in certain elusive activities and maybe not living up to the highest, in which I was getting in my own way a lot. And it was the book itself that was the motivation to get out of my way, to get out of my old ways, and to really hold me accountable on a much higher level than I can ever imagine.
When I think of publishing a book on living between two worlds, part of the scary part is you have to almost put both of the worlds in front of everyone for them to see. As a model, right? To go first, you've got to show them what the two worlds look like and what that pain looks like, and what you got to wear it on you. It's like becomes a tattoo. And there's a lot of the world that would prefer that the tattoos that are shown are selective. So how do you work on getting more of those, I'll just use the word ugly, tattoos out, the shadow work, the dark stuff, the healing, the less than ideal versions of self in front of the world? And then how do you encourage others to do the same?
I mean, luckily I wear them on my arm, quite literally. So it was a bit easier for me, right? But for everybody else, when we don't want to look at these ideal parts of self, it's really challenging, and I don't fluff it up either. I'm very much very real, very upfront. And what I did is I positioned it in a way that most could relate to as dark poetry or psychological poetry. And when I was able to use a creative writing format, creative philosophy, rather than having it be absolute truth, it be just a perspective in which truth could exist. And throughout the book, having points of inquiry and points of reflection, and also painting different visuals and imagery that was maybe not so focused on their experience, their lived experience, but maybe just something to allow them to see it from a different reference point, right? Because that's really all it is. It's just a perspective of what that void can be, and the darkness and the shadows that live in that void, and then how to navigate it. So through creativity, through poetry, through art, really is how I was able to manage to deliver it, because I've already gotten messages like, ooh, this one stung, but it stung so good. Right. And that's like the most desired effect with these types of book, right? It's like, you don't want something to come across like, oh, this is the way, right? Because the age of the guru is dead. But it comes across as in like, whoa, this person really understands my pain. And this person has also navigated it well enough to articulate it in a way that I've never been able to put my feelings into words. And this book just did that for me.
I'm reading one of the lines. Remember, the act of hiding requires far more energy than standing and embracing the truth of our existence. And to me, a lot of leadership is masked as just being a boss, being the owner, not true leadership, not service. I think the organization that we've all learned is like the triangle versus an inverted servant leadership kind of mentality. But I also think that leaders in many ways have much more room to hide. There's more things to hide behind. And I'd be curious how you encourage and what you would say to someone that like they kind of know they're hiding because they're trapped. They're like stuck in this, like, dude, I don't want to face it, but I also want to grow. And I know I got to face it to grow. But you know what? It's too much. I'm stuck and I don't know what to do. And how you would recommend they either face themselves or they face that hiding that they're doing.
Yeah. So this is a double-edged sword, right? Because I think in the personal development world and the leadership and personal growth and all these different ways that we want to compartmentalize our ascension or expansion, it's challenging, right? Because there's this first component of grace where it's like you're exactly where you're at and you're right where you need to be, because your higher power never gives you anything you're not ready for. And with that said, because you're looking at it and it's right in front of you, It means that you're ready to confront it. And it comes down to choice, right? Because how much is the suffering worth, right? Rather than saying, hey, you should do this, or you should do this, or you should do this, I would ask the question, how much is your suffering worth? Because if you've been suffering for a really long time with the same story and the same shadows and the same things that keep coming up and repeating themselves again and again and again, at what point do you get so sick and tired of being sick and tired? And what if the very thing you've been running from is the very thing that is your solution? And can you consider it for a moment? Because if you can, then in the realm of possibility, you have so many different decisions and choices there that you never had before. So the invitation is either face it or run into it again and like a mother do. If you have the space, if you have the time, capacity, do it. If you have so much going on in life, you can't even, wake up on time, right? You can't even, balance your life. If you can't take care of your body, then chances are you need to let go of a couple other things to create the space to confront the very thing that's causing all those maladaptive patterns to begin with.
I was thinking of it this morning because there's another line that I've heard from other writers. Running from darkness only leads to greater darkness. And yet, from the time we're kids, we kind of have this fear of darkness. And so the tendency is to run from it. And yet the truth of the matter, as you're saying, is you have to be willing to run if you're going to run, at least run towards it and face it head on. Otherwise, and I think you speak to it in the chapter on darkness, you'll begin to live your life from a very depleted place in some sense, from a place of lack or scarcity, whatever way you want to describe it. The running away from it will only lead to burnout at some point in your life.
So Nathan, like, I think it's important that we get tactical and like kind of crunchy about some of this stuff. Cause I think the meta piece is actually the conversation I love, but for someone that's like in it, let's dig here for a second. To me, when I think of not looking in the mirror and not recognizing that we're the problem, I'm still stuck in my own way. I'm like running from my darkness, or I'm hiding all these things. That's a very elevated and ambiguous statement designed to help wake someone up to their particular circumstance. But I do think it's good to get some nuggets that someone in it can start to say, okay, maybe I should pay more attention. When I hear those things, I think of like a business owner or an entrepreneur that is, they're anxious all the time, and their anxiousness plays into like the team anxiety, or like their vendors are always on alert because they're like all over the place all the time, and they're whipping their employees back and forth. I think of a person that's always late and doesn't manage their time well, that can't say no and set boundaries. But what are some of the things that stand out to you when someone isn't in touch with their darkness? How does it show itself?
So if somebody's not in touch with their darkness, it's going to look like they've got everything great on the outside, but when you look at their life, they don't have anybody around, right? And I'll speak to some entrepreneurs first, right? Because, the people who experience the most darkness are normally the ones who look like they have it put together the most, right? That's just the reality of nature, right? For as much light there is, there's just as much darkness. For as much darkness there is, there's just as much light. And normally the people who always are super happy all the time, I wonder and I question what their lows are like, right? I wonder, right? And I don't know, because I'm not them, and I'm not going to speak as though I know it, because I really don't. But what I do question a lot is, if you're having that great of highs, right, then what do those lows look like? And what do those people do when they're in those lows? Or are they just continuously running and running and running and running and stacking accolade on top of accolade on top of accolade on top of achievement on top of achievement on top of achievement on top of award and money and material, right? When I look at someone who is a little bit more rambunctious with materialism, I question it. Because a lot of the times when we lack that inner relationship, right, to darkness, and when we lack that inner relationship to self, we almost externalize and outsource the worth. Right? I'm not saying this is the case all the time, but it's very common, especially with what we see where we live. Right? It's very common, like this authoritarianism and materialism. And some of those people also are the ones who are always preaching, but they're not always listening, right? They're the ones who are always talking, the ones who are always informing, the ones who are always maybe ensuring that they're at the front of the room instead of in the audience, right? Because are they really listening to their own whispers? Or are they maybe talking down to that shadow of themselves and maybe posturing and positioning themselves in a way to where nobody questions if they're really okay? And I see this a lot, especially with veterans, because most veterans will walk around and, we were taught to, stand up tall, like rub some dirt on them, suck it up, right? You can't run, you can't fight, like, all that stuff, man. And what I realize is that the people who have the most, I guess, stoic or alpha or hardcore type of outlook on life are also, again, those who might not have a great relationship to their darkness because they've just been strong arming it the entire time. Like they're just white knuckling through it. And you can see it on their faces, right? The ones who are like super alpha, right? Always in the gym. Normally they're in sales, right? Normally they're doing some type of like high level, high performing work. And I have never see them slow down. I never see them stop. And that's not to say that the person isn't driven, but I question it, right? And I don't necessarily always know what it looks like because it's called the shadow for a reason, right? It's elusive. But how we see it show up a lot, especially in entrepreneurship, is always moving, always going, always creating, always selling, always working, never slowing down, never stopping, right? Sacrificing health, sacrificing sleep, sacrificing relationships, accumulating materials, accumulating wealth, all this shit. And these are the people that when they're alone, it's like terrifying sometimes because those lows are fucking bad.
Yeah, or they're never alone. Yeah, or they just work hard to make sure you're never alone.
Yep. That's me.
Yeah, me too, man. It was me, hands down. Yeah, for sure. Marty, I'd be curious to hear your take on this. Nathan, I think a lot of what we see, if I snippet some of what you shared here, like the inability to take feedback, the inability to really sit in stillness, the inability to stop, the inability to really reflect, to hear, to listen, to get insights, like all of those are also in some fashion pedestalized by what the old model of leadership was. So Marty, this is for you. Like, what do you think
Are you saying I'm old? Is that what you're saying?
You're 100, man. We know this already. We celebrated your centennial, man. We know this. What do you think the new model of leadership is? Because it can't be this like this never fall, never falter, uncrackable, handle the pressure anymore. It can't be that. Like that model is dead. That also died with the guru era too.
I'm not going to say that I've been perfect because I have not been perfect at it. I've hustled many times, and I think we all do, and we have to. If there's not an element of slowing down and learning to listen to yourself, I just don't see how you're going to make it as a leader, especially working with younger generations that I taught for years have a very different mindset coming in, and the care of the person, whether it's always healthy is one thing or another, is valued much more than it was in generations older. So making time for myself and doing what I need to do to be healthy, and asking those questions appears to older generations as us. I'll say us, even though I'm like in between those generations.
Well, debatable at 100, but
It's is seen as selfish, right? And so there is this almost opposing views of what it should be. I think the younger has the healthier version of that, of saying I do need to make time for myself and I need to have healthy boundaries and the other stuff that we're talking about here. I think there's got to be an element of slowing down. There just has to be an element of slowing down. Because I don't know how you listen, as Nathan just said. How do you listen if you never slow down? Because you're always thinking about what's next. You're thinking about how you're going to respond rather than trying to understand where that person's coming from. There's got to be a slowdown.
So let's swing it back to you, Nathan. Like, I agree with that, Marty. And I've had a hard time slowing down, as you know. But I think that to use the phrase, like the two worlds that leaders often exist in, there's like the mantle and the position. And by having this mantle and position, there is a whole other side of them that you really don't want to see. I mean, there's all this language about like, don't meet your heroes and all this. But I also think that there's like a reality that's starting to kick in where leadership doesn't need to have two worlds like it used to. So is there a new leadership that's also emerging, to Marty's point, where people can slow down, but also where people don't have to like hide that they're flawed. They don't have to hide that they're fallible and that they make mistakes. Like, is that an ideal for you?
Oh yeah. I mean, one of my keynotes is the art of authentic leadership. And I think that is where the world is going, man. You know, it's because we saw like the conscious leadership, right, scene come through, and now there's, you know, a lot of other words. People are using embodied leadership. People are using compassionate leadership. Some people are using empathic leadership. And really all these point towards what it looks like to have an authentic leadership style. And it doesn't mean to take away from the dynamic nature that leadership needs, because we still need that lion that like get shit done, right? You can't just like tuck that away and then, you know, it has to be there, right? But the authentic part is saying, hey, at this point, I need a break, and I need to be okay with not just taking a break, but telling my people that I need a break and asking for some help and saying, I don't have it all together. I'm still human too. And because of that, I need a break. And can I request that someone steps in for a minute, right? Because that's the thing, right? Like, leaders have like white knuckled and held onto these reins for so long that if God forbid, and I'm sure you can relate to this, right? I know I have, when I've brought on people for teams and projects and outsourcing things, and what I call like the silly control monster will start coming online. And it's so ridiculous, the amount of control that happens in that moment to want it a very certain way. And if it's not that way, then it's like, but cinching down on the reins just starves the horse, right? It just starves the business, right? And when we can let go of those reins a little bit and we can give it some grace, like we talked about earlier, but still just, instead of leaving in the cart completely, just move over to the passenger seat and just watch what it's like when somebody else takes the reins, like how relaxing that really is. And you're like, damn, I've been holding on to control for this long. And because I'm human and I ask for help, I'm able to take not a time off, but simply just slow down and rest, so I can watch the magic of my leadership. Because how is this person going to see how well they're leading if they're not taking a step back and watching how people take control or how they command when they step back?
Yeah, that's the slowdown. I mean, I also think of your book, the Myth of the Messiah, because many older former leaders have had this idea that somehow the business cannot operate or survive without me. I met many in my former life like that, would never take a day off, never get away, because the place cannot exist without me. And how prevalent that is also in that sickness of leadership culture.
Yeah, I also find that authentic can be a really interesting word in the realm of leaderships. Like these boats going down a river. There's all these leaderships. And the reason I say this, and I really want to hear both of you on this, because you've seen a lot of it. I used to think that authentic sounded different than what everyone else was saying, right? You could survey 13 people and the authentic one was the one that said something completely different. And then I learned the hard way that I was the one saying the thing different just to be different. And I was mixing up. The best way I could say it is I was mixing up authenticity with being like cavalier or contrarian.
I was going to say like standing out.
Yeah, like I'm going to be different, and that makes me authentic. And I think this is happening a lot now too, where one of the things that we do at our retreats is we refuse to give out the schedule, because if we give out the schedule, someone can't show up authentically in that moment, because they'll premeditate like how they show up. Or if someone says like, be vulnerable, like immediately everyone goes into like, this is how I'm vulnerable. So I'm curious, like, how do you help someone be authentic when there's like all these warped definitions of what it means, and inspire someone to connect with themselves in all of their different capacities and relay a message that is truly them, regardless of their brokenness or pain? It's a tough question. I'm just really curious to know what you both say.
Oh, sure. The older guy could take it first.
Yeah, you got 100 years of experience, man.
I mean, I'm thinking of moments where I felt like I was most authentic, even when I was a priest. What comes to mind is like my mouth gets dry and I'm really nervous and I'm anxious, and because I know I'm revealing something about myself that is so personal and so to me that there is a level of authenticity to it. There were plenty of times like that. I think that's what first comes to mind from my experiences: that dry mouth, nervous. How are people going to see me? How am I going to be perceived? Because in that moment, we're afraid of revealing who we really are, revealing our authentic self.
So there's a fear there. Nathan, what about you?
Yeah, I mean, I'm very much like you, Aaron, where I'm like, dude, if I'm the disruptor in the room, if I'm the going against the grain, like that's the authentic. But really, that wasn't me being authentic. That was me being a completely resistant anti-authoritarian. But I'll kind of frame this like I did with Marty, at least for me, and then I'll kind of like maybe share and shed my professional perspective here. But on a personal level, being authentic to me is really just showing up and not giving a shit about what anyone else thinks, how I look, right? I'm not like what you said, premeditating anything. I'm simply just allowing myself to flow through myself, almost as though I'm an art on canvas. And there's only one of those things. And the brush strokes might be all super fucked up. I mean, I might have gone through and torn the canvas, like put a handprint on there, hell, maybe even put my butt cheeks on it. That's what my canvas would probably look like, because I'm a mildly deranged psychopath. So even now, right? It's 100%. And that's the thing, right? It's I can take the qualities that I judge myself most about, and I can let everything be seen and fully own that, like, I'm fucking human and I'm not here to impress anybody. I'm here to serve. I'm here to lead. And I'm also not going to change and perform just for the sake of doing it, just for the title, right? Take all the titles away. And I kind of look at this from a professional perspective, right? Because it's like you get that magic crystal ball and you put all your labels and all your designations, right? Maybe me and Marty have our ordinations in there, right? Maybe Aaron, you have like your publications in there. Maybe somebody else has their doctorate in there. Somebody has their PhD. Somebody has their lawyer's degree and their license for therapy and all that stuff that makes someone who they are in the world. And then you ask, who's actually holding the crystal ball? If all those things are inside the ball, then who's really holding it? And can you let that person holding the crystal ball without any labels walk into a room and just be how they are without any agenda or objective? That's what I think authenticity is.
It's a really interesting perspective to hear. I think the modern phrase is "don't give a shit." If I had to make that a to-do item, it would be to focus on the process, not the outcome. And that's a really hard thing to do in today's world where outcomes are like really important. Like they matter a lot. And we talk about them and it keeps the business up and there's a duality that I think is really special. And my opinion lately, especially with what you and I got to catch up a while ago, like some of the things that I've been dealing with personally has forced me to believe that intelligence has to believe in contradiction. Intelligence, like the more intelligent you are, the more paradoxical you can accept the world is, and the more contradiction you can tolerate, and the more both exists. And I think it's really interesting because authenticity, if we're letting go of like the outcome and we don't give a shit about what somebody else thinks, like if we swing too far that way, you also get really warped. Like, cause then you're just out of touch and you're just like, if you care what no one thinks, you can't hear feedback and you're probably a really shit leader and you really don't have a grounding.
Well, you're probably a dick leader.
Oh man, you're probably awful to be around. Like, and I don't know what that paradox looks like, but when I think of between two worlds, I also think of like, be in both, like be in your dark, be in your magic, be authentic, also play the game because we all wear masks. Like you kind of got to do it all. And I don't know how to make sense of all that. So as you're writing this book, how did you make sense of that? How did you combine paradox into a story and create? I mean, there's a lot of wisdom in this that even just scrolling through, like you could just tell you've sat in the discomfort for a long time. Like, how'd you make it through and make sense of it all?
I still don't even know. I still don't know how I'm making sense of it. Those are honestly the words that came to mind when I wrote it. You know, but as you're,
I want to ask it in a different way though. What prompted the book? Like where does the book come from in you and your own? Because I think that also reveals some of the answer to that question.
That's a great way to ask it, Marty, because all those perspectives in the book, right? Mind you, I wrote the book backwards. So I'm with my publisher and she asked me, what are the major perspective shifts that need to happen in this book? And I wrote them all out. Right? What do you want people to walk away with and learn? What do you want people to walk away with and feel? What do you want people to walk away with knowing that it might save their life? So I really had to go back and look through all the perspective shifts that have changed my life or saved my life. And if you go through the book, you'll see where they're like indented and bolded, right? Those are all the main perspective shifts. I started the book with that. And then the story and the sections and the chapters were formed around those perspectives after they were categorized. So just in the nature of the book, I mean, the way the book even started out at first was because my mom was killed. And I didn't know what the fuck to do with that. I didn't know how to process that type of pain. It's the only thing I've never experienced. And that's the one and only time I will ever experience losing a mom. And I didn't know what to do. And I am very well equipped. I'm very well equipped. And I have a strong community behind me. And I have great friends. And I have family who loves me also. And for some reason, none of that was enough. And I initially wrote the book with the intention to leave my mother's legacy through my words. I wrote the book because it had nothing to do with me. That was me sharing and speaking everything I needed to hear to make it through that. Right? Because it's one thing to contemplate ending my own life. Right? I look at that and I'm like, done, easy. Right? That's actually in the chapter, The Spirit of Suicide. Right? And different perspective of it, and the ego suicides or micro suicides that we commit every day without knowing it. And the invitation that consciously killing ourselves, right? Not in a material way, but in a metaphorical way, right? The metaphorical killing of oneself is the process itself, right? And it's to recognize that in those darkest of moments, where does my mind go? Right? How am I able to care for myself when the person I cared about most, or the person who cared about me most, is no longer here? How do I fill that void, right? That's what lives between two worlds, is the void. And how do I source safety, love, freedom, and truth, which are what I believe to be the 4 fundamental human qualities of life? And that is how those 4 chapters in the middle of the section 2, death, are written. So through the metaphor and through the experience of the pain I was in, quite deeply, I'll add, all of that was birthed from the way I was trying to make sense of my own pain, on top of just decades and decades and decades of story and suffering and self-imposed chaos and self-inflicted wounding, and also wounding from other people, and just having the background that I do. All of it just came together in a beautiful way, if that answers your question.
So, I mean, with her death, did it feel like those 4 things were also ripped from you at the same time? That she, in some ways, provided those four elements.
It did feel like those 4 things I had lost completely, because in that moment, man, all the tools went out the window. Like, I mean, the only tool I knew in that moment was to just don't let my body lock up. Like when I got that call, I said, don't let my body lock up. Don't stop breathing. Don't fucking punch a wall. Don't do all of these different reactive things. Literally just get on the fucking ground and let your body shake as you listen to like this phone call and what's happening, and allow yourself to breathe and shake, breathe and shake, breathe and shake, so that this experience can actually move through you. And it's because I didn't allow it to get stuck and frozen that I believe was a fundamental piece in how I was able to maybe just hold it all together, you know, at the initial early stages. Because I mean, my family wasn't holding it together.
Were you already familiar with the somatic work that, I mean, you currently do somatic type work? Were you already familiar with it at that time? So you kind of had there was a tool there for that, at least.
Yeah, I've been pretty deep in somatic work since 2018. So thank God, right? I have a background in somatic work and psychology and psychedelics and plant medicine, and I've done, you know, those things also. So thank God, really, you know, because if I did not have those tools, I don't know what I would have done. I don't know what it would have been like. And even that was kind of in the forefront of my mind too, right? Like, how many people go through this type of stuff that don't have the tools, that don't have somebody to talk to, that don't have a perspective other than what the clinical therapist is writing and publishing on Amazon, right? From a sociology and psychology and therapy background, right? Who has this more alternative and holistic, and we'll say a quote unquote spiritual, right? Even though it's very subjective and I don't like saying that, right? From a more psycho-spiritual element, I'll say, from a more alternative side of the world.
And so much of it is macro, but I mean, Aaron could speak to this as well. When we just had someone on retreat last month who was so alone in what he was going through that I don't even always think that I don't want to ask for help. I think sometimes I don't even know what to ask for help for, because it feels like so many things are out of control at the moment. And so we experience that quite, there's such a loneliness in that experience. It's not just about being alone. It's a loneliness. It's a pain that comes with it in those moments. And, it's on a very micro level, we see that all the time on our retreats.
Yeah. Nathan, I hear so much wisdom in like you navigated grief with these tools. I don't think there's any tools that most people have for grief, because the only time you really learn grief is in it. And by that point, it's too late. It'd be like standing at the ocean and picking up seashells and someone is like, hey, bro, there's a tsunami. Like, there's no way, like, you can't run, right? You can't run from it. You're just about to get hit with this wave. And grief has hit me in various different points at various different capacities. And thankfully, grief, this is a weird thing to say, grief got progressively harder as those experiences matched my own growth. But if you had all those tools, were you able in the midst of that to still ask for help, or was it a solo journey for you?
Yeah. I mean, dude, thank God I was in this mastermind. And, I called my coach, Adam Roa, who actually wrote the foreword for my book. And he was the first call I made, because I was like, if anybody can help me with this right now, it'll be him. And he was able to lead me through a beautiful process. And, again, there were community calls and I would show up. Ryan Blair was actually speaking on one of the calls. I asked him a question because I had found out he lost his mom the very same, not the same exact way, but in a similar way in which there was a story around being taken. And, when he shared with me this process and writing, all the things that I had regretted, all the things I wish I would have said, all the things that I wish I could say now, or the lessons that I've learned, and then burning all of those, right? If it weren't for those processes post grief, which definitely helped, right? I mean, thank God I didn't feel as alone, because I had put myself in the room with people who not only were successful, right? Because I think success is, again, super subjective, but they were spiritually attuned to a higher power that I could not even comprehend, right? And there are these people who are just so wise when they open their mouth, like, I'm just enamored. I don't even know how to respond to some things they say sometimes. I just sit there and I'm like, I'm going to have to sit with that and chew on it for like a week. And then I'm going to text you and ask you another question just to get enamored and floored again, right? Because it's those types of perspectives and insights that I love, right? And a lot of those, right, insights in the book, I hope have the same effect, right? And again, thank God I had support, and it was just up and down, man. Like you're saying, there's no tool that I feel is a concrete, absolute, this is how you navigate grief. That will never happen. I don't think it can be, right? I don't think grief can even be summarized, right? They say that there's the 6 stages of grief. And I look at that thing, I'm like, fuck this person, whoever created this thing, because that's not how it's going. No, it's like up to 1, 2, 3. Nope, back to 1, 1, 2, 3. Nope, back to 2, 1, 2, 3, 4, 2, 7, 4, 6. There's not even a 7th step. What is this? What is this I'm feeling? I don't even know. Like, right? So I think, the number one tool that I had, man, is prayer. Just prayer. It's so fascinating to me how death brought me closer to God than ever before. Right? Because at some point in time, I just had to say, like, what I'm doing and what I know and who I know isn't quite cutting it. Right? And I'm not saying finding God through like the religious means, right? I'm a very non-religious man, right? I mean by that relationship to something that has a higher authority and a higher knowing than I could ever comprehend with my feeble human comprehension. And if I can't figure this out, then just please something take this away. And if I can just give it away for a day, just to feel some peace and in that peace have gratitude and celebrate what they've given me, like this life, right? Or maybe this, material object that, makes my desk look all like super blinged out, right? Like this is my mom's. And something that I can remember her by, and all the lessons just by one glance from a hat, right? Like, thank you for this, right? Thank you for not just giving me life or giving me something to smile about, but right, giving me the wisdom to share it with others, and I don't, and it doesn't just apply to someone like a loved one or a mom or a dad. It applies to anyone who we've lost, anyone who's touched us, anyone who we cared enough about to actually experience the grief that came with it.
I think it's a grief where it's a specific kind of grief where there's just no answers. What you're speaking of, you can have all the tools, you can have all the education, but there's something very profound about the grief that comes with that type of loss, where none of the answers work anymore, and you really have to dig in much deeper in yourself to find something that goes beyond any kind of knowledge.
Yeah, I mean, this is what they teach in AA, right? In Alcoholics Anonymous. The first step is what? Admit that we have become unmanageable, that our situation, that our life has become unmanageable. And the second step is to develop the relationship to whatever that higher power is, to then give it away, And not to say that AA is the way. I mean, this is the first time I'm even referencing or even believing in what they're talking about in 14 years of being in recovery. And even as I've kind of gone back into these meetings, like I've helped myself understand what they're really talking about and what recovery really means and what sobriety might mean as well, right? To have a sober thought from society's confined, right? Or society's constraints, for instance, right? To be sober from those constraints, to be sober from what we were talking about earlier, right? The old ways of leadership, right? And if we can just do that, right? I think that's also the part of authentic leadership, just kind of like swinging back around. For some reason, there's that authentic nature of like, I don't know what the fuck to do, and I'm just going to give it away, right? Like, I don't know what to do with this, so I'm just going to give it to God, and hopefully it works itself out. And then boom, normally when that happens, someone comes along and says, hey, I'd love to help you with this. You got time? Like, I've had so many of those moments, right? Where you just let go, and then all of a sudden the person calls you and says, hey, so I got this project I'm working on. Oh, okay. Yeah, let's set something up.
That's the control piece. You spoke about the control piece earlier. And as soon as you let go of that control, something opens up.
Nathan, what happens because we've been talking about the shadow and leaders that aren't confronting themselves, what's the consequence of not dealing with grief? Like you maybe can't have the tools and maybe can't be ready for it, but that tsunami is coming. What happens if you don't deal with it? What's the consequence of that?
I mean, dude, you can only run from a tornado for so long until it sweeps you up and throws you onto the barn, right? And, for those of you who grew up in Oklahoma and wherever that is, the butthole of the United States, if you're not looking at the thing that is just satiating on suffering, right? That it's just like salivating at the thought of your pain. I would encourage you to maybe look at like, man, not only are you a sadist, but you're also an avoidant, because right, we can only run from something for so long, because it's not like your shadow goes anywhere. It's called a shadow for a reason. When you walk outside and the sunlight hits you, it's like, oh yeah, all this light and warmth and gratitude for the day. Like behind you is a very cold, dark, like kind of neglected part, right? Sometimes we don't give a lot of gratitude for it, but why would we? What function does it have, right? But if you were in combat, right, or if you were walking around your neighborhood and you saw a shadow around the corner of someone holding a gun, that might give you an indication that there's some danger around the corner, right? So to say that the shadow has no function is to say that the sun doesn't need to shine. It's inherently, right? This is the duality piece we're talking about. So if you don't pay attention to the shadow, then eventually you're going to get hit by something. And when it does, you'll be all right. But if you're willing and able and prepared ahead of time, just like anything else, it's not going to sting as much, right? Instead of getting roundhouse to the shin and breaking your tibia, right? You might just get a little slap along up the backside of the head, right? You're not going to the hospital. You just might have to go to the urgent care and just get some medicine, right? You're not going to have to go through a whole psychic surgery to extract whatever it is that you've been shoving down into your body or into your nervous system or into your soul for a lifetime, right? So let's just like bring some of this stuff up, right? We don't just jump into a parasite cleanse, right? Normally there's a few steps like eating healthier foods and drinking better water and getting adequate sleep before we go in and just try to rip everything out of our stomach lining, right? It just doesn't make sense.
Yeah, it makes me think of the book The Body Keeps the Score. So if y'all haven't read that, I highly recommend that. Second, of course, to Nathan's book, because we're highlighting that today. But well, I don't think mine deserves. They're very different topics. All right, very, very different topics. But I appreciate the effort there. I know the effort was there. I do appreciate that. But I would suggest, this conversation has an interesting arc. We've talked about leadership and the need to deal with, whatever is ailing you, the pain and not avoiding it. And then kind of getting into what happens when you navigate grief. I think that this idea of like the body keeps score is a really important part of this. The demands of leaders today are so much more holistic than they ever used to be. And maybe this is where we can go just kind of in conclusion for today. The leaders used to be go to work, go home, your lives are separate. There were two worlds and you never had to deal with any of this stuff in between. There was no conversation about what was going on in personal life. In fact, I'd say if we look at generations, millennials were the first group in the workforce that started to create conversations about the life outside of work. And now as it has trickled down, it's gotten it's become much different, where now the conversation of outside of work is just as important as the conversation inside of work. But leaders have to be fit now. They have to have stamina. They have to have like emotional intelligence. There's so much more demand on someone to be a leader, not a boss, because that's sort of representative of what we've been saying happens if you don't do this kind of work. Why do you think that leadership takes so much more? Is it because the people we're managing are much more dynamic themselves? Is it the world? Is it what it takes to be successful? Like, why do we have to have it all as a leader today?
I mean, the first thing that comes to mind is culture, right? Like culture is the driving force of every successful company. It's the very core driving force of everything that makes something whole and complete, right? Without yogurt, without culture, right? Your yogurt is not yogurt. It tastes like shit. It's just a bunch of raw dairy, right? It doesn't have the necessary requirements in order to make something so delicious and nutritious that it keeps you sustained for a long, long time, right? So just as yogurt, which is an interesting metaphor that I've never used before, but it's working. So we're just figuring it out, right? But I sat down with a mentor and he said that climate is the fundamental function of every culture, which kind of blew my mind because I've never heard someone say that. Like I've always heard people talk about culture, but I've never heard them talk about the climate. And I think right now, and for all the conspiracy realists out there, with all the weather modification things and the sonic technology at the North and South poles, I'll let you guys go on your own dark hole rabbit search. When we start looking at how the climate, right, influences one's behavior and how it influences the environments and the culture's ability to sustain and create something deep and meaningful and something that can proliferate life beyond its own, it's really fascinating because the climate alone can either make something or destroy something. And as leaders, we have all of these different responsibilities, right? Like resiliency is our rain, and honesty is our sunshine, and our grief and our authenticity might be the cloudy weather or the wind that comes through. And if we don't have range, then what's going to happen is that climate is going to become very stale and very harsh, much like Oklahoma. And nothing is going to want to live there. Nothing is going to even want to pass through. And the scenery is going to look like dog shit. Nobody's going to want to visit, right? Who has ever said, I want to go visit Oklahoma for spring break? Nobody. Right? Anybody from Oklahoma, don't take it personal. It's just, I had a rough experience. And I'm from Arizona, right? We have the most gorgeous sunsets. I was born in California, beaches, obviously. It's not about Oklahoma. It's about the climate, and it's about the culture, right? Right. But all that to say, right, now that I've created a very vivid picture and idea of what I'm talking about, mansplaining the shit out of this, it's the culture and the climate. It's understanding that without that culture, and if leaders don't know how to create culture, and if leaders don't have culture, if we don't come from a strong culture, then now is the time to understand that. And then the climate that someone creates, right, is the range of their leadership expression. And the importance of that, to have all the weathers, all the seasons.
I was going to add just one point to that, Aaron, because I think in some ways you answered the question with the question, in that if we're at a point where the person comes as a whole, where there isn't a separation between work and personal life, that's a lot more gray and less split. You're going to have to deal with a whole lot more in the workplace because it's not compartmentalized as it may have been in the past. I still have to believe that those issues existed, because I don't know how you separate so much of that shit when you go into into your workspace. It probably resulted in different ways or came out in different ways. But I think that there's more of an acceptance of the person coming as a whole. More is going to be expected of the leader because of that, because you're now looking at the person as a whole, not simply as a cog in the wheel.
Yeah, it's hard to think of, just because of what I've experienced in the workforce, a world where that's not true, where you can just have a total split and just be two different people, and you're one way at the job, and then you get home and you're like soft, fun, enlightened father or family man, whatever. But I think in some sense, the place that I like to attack this from, or maybe sit in, is to use the word range. That if leaders don't have depth and range, they're probably ill-equipped to navigate the personal experiences that others don't know how to navigate, or the hardship that others don't know how to navigate, so that they can perform. Like if you're really responsible for some performers, some go-getters, some really A players, which we all want on our team, and people listening, if you don't have A players on your team, I'm going to tell you something. It's because of you. That's why they're not there. Because if you don't have range, you can't have A players on your team, because A players have such a swing. Like, it's natural. Like, A players play so hard that they have a natural collapse on the far side. They're so optimistic and so like, I can do anything, that there's also the shadow side, which is I'm not enough unless I perform, and I'm never going to be enough, and no one's going to love me. Like, if you don't have the range to encapsulate their range, you can't lead an A player. That's how I would say it.
Yeah, I mean, there's a saying, right, that you can only lead someone as deep as you've gone yourself, right? And even in the shamanic tradition, they say that the shaman quite literally translates to one who leads those through darkness that he has already navigated, right? Or something of that nature. And yeah, right, because if you haven't met the depth of your own pain, and somebody comes to you in pain, then how can you be relatable, right? Like, we can't relate to it and For those who are listening, who are like super into content creation and sales and marketing, we know the first thing that we have to do when we're selling ourselves is what? We need to evoke an emotion. And the first question we ask is it relatable? Right? Relativity is the number one thing that's going to get somebody to let down their walls of sensitivity. And if we can't relate to them, then like, what are we doing? Right? Where's the humanity in that? Right. So that's the importance. That's why there's such an emphasis on authenticity, to be really authentic, right? And be very honest with ourselves, right? Like how many leaders are walking around right now pretending like they've got it all together? Probably a lot. And then, right? Are they married? Do they have kids? Are they divorced? Right? Are they happy? Are they really happy? Right? Are they really happy? Right? That's the real question to ask. Because you can be happy on the outside, but are you happy on the inside? Right? My friend Weston Ritchie says that. You know, he has a whole talk on happiness, right? And happiness being a choice, and it really actually being a choice, if you really can acknowledge it. You know, he says it way better than I do. But those are just some things to look at, right? Like, can we meet ourselves so deeply as leaders that we not only have depth, but we have range, right? I even wrote in my book that range is the religion of the nervous system. If you have your spiritual foundation as range, like you can meet anyone, meet anything, and go anywhere and support everything at the same time. Because that's all we're doing. Like range, we're just expanding our capacity. That's all range is. We're just expanding our capacity. We're just looking at something and then understanding with capacity, we can handle more intensity. We can move at either a higher or a lower speed. And then we can also go down in intensity. We can also meet people with a softer hand, a more gentle touch, because we as leaders have to have range, because we need to be able to manage the vastness of all the personalities and all the people we come into contact to, while not letting it affect us and having our get shit together. You know what I mean?
Nicely said. Yeah. Man, if you are in position of leadership and that doesn't land with you, it's time to do the work. Because if you don't fully understand that, it is time to get to work. Or if that doesn't feel like an experience that you have, or if you are struggling with people that feel out of range, that is your work.
Yeah. You know, and if someone's asking, like, what does that mean? What does range mean? Right? What does he mean by that? You know, it's not to push yourself to do it, but be curious about it, right? It's like the more curious we are, like, I think that's like the fundamental leadership quality moving forward about authenticity. Right? Can I like surrender my own judgments, my own expectation about who I am or how I think things need to be done? And can I just get more curious? Right? Can I get curious? Can I have fun? Can I like learn to explore these ranges? Right? Like nobody goes to the shooting range to not have fun. Right? We go to the shooting range to blow shit up and have a good time. You know what I mean? Like we're going to the range to get range to exercise a skill. Right? It's training.
I hear an invitation to leaders that are maybe not aware that in order to lead with range, they will have to experience range, which I think is important. That's an important comment to make. And again, if you are listening and you're like, now I understand, but it's not happening, that is the invitation to do the work, is to say, hey, you have to experience your range so that you could help someone else as a leader experience their own. I think that's really important. Where can people find the book? Where can people find you as we taper this down? Like, I think this is an important place to make sure people go buy the book now. Buy the book. I'm looking at you. Buy the book now. And let's support Nathan. Tell us all about it, man.
Yeah, thank you, man. It can be found on Amazon. The title is called Between Two Worlds, Atlas for Navigating the Complexities of Life, Death, and Suicide. Kindle version is now up. I'll be going to record the audiobook towards the end of the month in my voice, which is going to be great. And everybody can find me at Nathan Kohlerman, pretty much any social platform at Nathan Kohlerman. Just search that up. You'll find me.
Amazing. Marty, any last questions while Nathan's on the hot seat?
Last questions? No, I mean, I've gotten to know Nathan well the past year and a half, I guess, since we first met. And talking so much about authenticity here, my experience has always been that you show up authentically. You don't always know what you're going to say or what's going to come out, which is great. I find that to be a breath of fresh air, because so many people are confine themselves and have to say things properly. But there is always an authenticity that comes with you that keeps pulling me back and just enjoys being with you.
Oh, I appreciate that, Marty. Yeah, it's been a great ride, man, getting to know you more. It's been an absolute honor. And I mean, you too, Aaron. I really appreciate you bringing me on and just having this conversation. I can only hope that it helps someone, and I just appreciate you both.
I'm sure it will. Yeah, I'm pretty confident it will. I'll taper down with this. The world is full of people who will tout leadership and will tout seminars and workbooks and personal development. And I think that very few will talk about the spectrum that we did today. And Nathan, I really appreciate the pain and the violence that it has taken to create such a gentle conversation. As energized as it may be, this is also a very gentle way to help someone see what's possible if they do the work.
And that's him. That describes him well.
Yeah. I think on the outside, when Marty and I talk about, like, power or force, we've done a podcast on that, or we talk about change in leadership and all those things, like the gentleness that someone brings to the table is much, much, much more respected now, having been through my journey. And I'm sure Marty can say the same. It hits different when you understand where it comes from. It's not gentle. There's a gentle that's naive, and then there's a gentle that's complete. And I just can appreciate how much you've had to work to create that gentle.
Yeah, thank you, man. Yeah, likewise. You spot it, you got it, dude. You spot it, you got it.
All right. Well, thank you for tuning in. I would highly recommend you get Nathan's book as quick as possible. I don't think Amazon sells out, but I'm going to tell you, there's only one more copy. And if you don't buy it right now, a giant cow will fall from the ceiling and land on top of you. So you need to buy this book right away. Give him a follow. And if you have any questions about how to reach him or need help getting out of your own way, Nathan's got some great work in the arena. So do we, and we'd be happy to point you to whatever would serve you best. Nathan, again, thank you for being here. Marty, thanks for being here as well. And we'll see you on the next show.